Chapter 11. The Council of the Mast. It was a grey morning streaked with cold drizzle when the Council of the Mast came to Terracaste for its assembly. Everyone who had come still had damp upon their cloaks as they gathered in the throne room at Stoneprow. The windows of the throne room had all been shut to keep out the foul weather, but there was still a cold draught from the gaps in the shutters. Lanterns and braziers had been lit to chase out the gloom, and by the abundant firelight the mosaics on the ceilings and walls glimmered. There were designs depicting the adventures of bygone heroes, designs of ships cresting the curling waves, designs of great sea monsters writhing on the waters. The whole room shone with symbols that pointed to Havermere's glory. The aisle down the centre of the room was paved with stones taken from every region and island in the nation's domain, and on each side of the aisle there was a large oval pool. A ship floated in each pool with its bow and stern moored to pillars. These were the legendary ships Night and Day, the ships that had carried Mir and his army of Lovos to the battle against the Kiragas. Each ship had a mighty prow shaped like the head and strong neck of a Sanea, a lithe and graceful hunter of the sea. At the end of the aisle sat the throne, a seat of white stone set on a large sculpted vertuga. Saneas were carved into the arms, and a half-sun made from cormantle and translucent reef gems crested the top. Maris remembered how her father looked when he had sat upon the throne, with his arms firm on the rests and his bold eyes glaring down. It appeared as though he were a mighty pagan god of the sea. Maris did not feel mighty seated on the throne, elevated above all others in the room. She felt small, frail, and exposed. The white stone seat was much too big for her, and the tips of her toes could just reach the step below. The reins had taken their places on the ships Night and Day, where seats had been put on the decks. All of their speaking totems had been collected and placed in an elevated bowl beside the throne. Filling the tiered seating at the back of the room were men of high title, those who had not come to speak but to observe. In the very last row sat Heron. It seemed that he thought of severe matters, for his face held a grim and pensive expression. Normally the tiered seating where he and the others sat would have been empty, for the council assemblies were considered tedious occasions when the old men spoke on and on. But on that particular morning, a matter of great concern drew the people there: what to do with the legend. The people had heard of how he had killed Halorith, how he had closed Tierion's wall on the Ereathea's neck just to show his power in a fight, and so they feared that he would open the earth beneath their houses or have the sea swallow their villages if ever he grew angry. There was also fear of divine punishment, for surely Ahotho would not be pleased with their harbouring of a murderer. The people cried out for something to be done, and therefore the rains called for a gathering in Stoneprow. They came from all over Havermere, representing various islands and regions, and presented themselves before their queen. "Council of the Mast," Maris stated. "Your queen welcomes you. Advise her and give her good counsel. You have come to continue the greatness of the islands, shores, and hills of Havermere. Therefore let us speak only wisdom here, and let us create mandates that are pleasing to Ahotho. And let us not forget the Ulurans and their guidance," said a creaking voice in the back of the room. It seemed that the Mania had materialized out of nowhere, for no one had seen her enter. She walked slowly down the aisle and neared the throne, carrying with her a jar of smouldering lithy. No guard tried to restrain her, for the Mania went here and there as she pleased. She sat down on one side of the dais, near enough to the throne that the tattered edges of her garment mingled with the smooth fabric of the queen's long gown. Many in the room were unsettled, for it was rare to see a Mænir come indoors. They were a people who lived on an island with no houses and who slept on the bare ground. Therefore the Mænir's arrival under the roof of Stoneprow appeared as an ominous sign. Even so, the council continued with its proceedings. The Rains followed custom and had the oldest of them speak first, so with the help of his staff, Rain Tekero rose from his seat and stood on the deck of night.
"Who has not spoken of the thing that gathers us here? I tell you, even our children speak of it. A great curse has befallen our people, a curse put upon us by our foe. Where have we found this curse? Look to what transpired by the Urgan. It has been said that a single Hagwar may raid a company of travellers, but 3 Hagwars at once is unheard of. Foul spirits I name them, workers of Ahafo's wrath. Why then has the Legender come to us? The King of Tierion wishes to give us a new protector, to replace the one we lost in Hallerith. But the Legender has not brought us protection, he has brought us only harm."
Everyone had heard the official reason for why the Legender had come to Havamir, but there were rumours that told of different reasons. Some said that Queen Maris had brought the Legender to Havamir so he could give her an immortal heir. Others claimed that the Queen would have the Legender opened up the hills to find for her the precious stones underground. Many on the council considered these reasons as they listened to Tekero speak. Their faces were subtle and knowing.
"With this curse, what are we to do?"
Tekero continued, his voice rising in power.
"Cast him out! Cast out the Legender, and may he never return to Havamir! Cast him out, and may we be rid of the curse on our lands!"
Tekero ended his speech with so much passion that he nearly collapsed into his chair when he finished. After he spoke, many in the throne room nodded their heads in agreement. Other Rains spoke, most affirming what Tekero had said, but some added that the Legender should be flogged before being cast out, a final punishment to be certain that sins would be paid for. After many addressed the council and gave their views, Korakal was given his opportunity to speak.
"I have listened well to what my elders have said. The words come from good thinking, but I cannot agree with them, for banishment is not enough. To banish a killer is to set him free, and that is not the justice Havamir needs. If we are to rid ourselves of this curse, the Legender is to be punished. Only then will Ahafo be satisfied. Let us be wise in how we punish him. Let us not be like the man who tossed aside a gem because it was concealed in a clod of soil. Think on what would be lost if we banished the Legender, a being that can speak to the sea and shape it to his will. Would it be wise to discard such a resource, so rare and potentially beneficial? Let his punishment not only rid us of a curse, but bring us a blessing as well. King Mercius ordered the Legender to guard Havamir for only time. I propose that we extend his service for much longer. Let us make him a servant of Havamir for as long as our nation stands. This, I think, is the proper way for him to pay for his crime."
There was more nodding of agreement, many seeing great wisdom in what Korakal had said. Other Rains rose to speak, some in favour of banishment and others in favour of Korakal's proposed enslavement of the Legender. There were those who imagined the Legender doing great things for Havamir, such as calming storms that threatened fleets and ports. There were also those who imagined only grim things, those who wondered what form the curse would take if the Legender remained. As the debate went on and on, many began to wonder when Reign Ezirs would stand and give the final word. There was no official hierarchy in the Council of the Mast, no titles of superiority given to any one member, but there were Rains who held more sway than others. They came from powerful families and had been bred to be men of influence. Reign Ezirs was one of those men, and it was widely believed that he was the most powerful man on the council. There was a grim confidence about him as he sat on the deck of night, and he patiently bided his time. He had eyes that were dark and piercing, and a beard that came to a point like a spearhead. Concealed under his clothes were scars striping his arms and chest, marks he had received from the Maufin wars. The Sartians had tortured him, yet he had escaped their pits and returned to Havamir alone and blooded. He never spoke of his wounds, and no one ever dared to ask about them. When he thought the debate in the throne room had gone on for long enough, he at last rose from his place. A Reign from a lesser family was speaking, but grew silent when he saw Ezirs rise. "I have fallen into a group of men bewitched by the word legend," Ezirs declared, "and it has made all of them forget the law. Do they need reminding? Anyone who slays an Ereathir shall in turn be slayed. I am not enchanted by this legender's abilities or the stories of his kind. He is a murderer, and the council will see him as nothing more. It is true that an immortal's blood is worth much more than a man's, but the Ereathir's death was a great loss to us, greater than the death of 100 men. An immortal's blood will atone." No one rose to speak after Ezirs. If the other Reigns had anything more they wished to say, they kept it within themselves. Therefore, everyone in the room turned their attention to the Queen to hear what she would say in response to the council. "I have listened to your words," she said weakly, "and I have pondered them. Many of you wish to see the legender punished, but he saved my life in the Urgan marshes. He saved me from a brutal death at the jaws of a Hagwar. How can I condemn him? I cannot. Therefore I declare that my salvation will serve as atonement for his crime." She said the last word so softly that it was almost unheard. "I will dismiss the legender from his service, and he will never have to enter our lands again." "Now!" a voice cried beside the throne. The Meinir stood up from her place on the dais. Anger writhed over her face, so that she appeared old, then young, then old again. Those seated near her cringed. "Your edict will not bring justice," she yelled, "for the Ulvans cry out against the legender. They demand his life. They demand his life." "But the legender saved my life. Surely the Ulvans must understand." "Foolish girl! Do you not remember what I told you before? The Ulvans are always certain of what they demand. Now give the legender a word of death and end this curse on us." The Meinir sat back down on the dais, muttering to herself. The council quickly returned its attention to Maris, waiting to hear what their queen would say in response to the Meinir's demands. For a long time, Maris held still and stared at the isle in front of her. Shame reddened her face. Though she did not move, all could tell that thoughts stirred wildly inside her head. Her skin then turned pale, and it seemed she was becoming ill. She moved ever so slowly, first taking the cormantle circlet from her head and then standing up from the throne. When she had descended one step down the dais, she spoke. "I will have no part in condemning the legend. I will break from this assembly. This crown and throne I will no longer be." "I will share the legender's punishment," shouted a gruff voice suddenly. Everyone turned their gaze to see Ehredt standing in the back of the row of the tiered seating. Murmurs began to fill the throne room, and the sound would have grown to an uncontrollable din had not one of the Rains cried out in a loud voice, "You are not permitted to speak here, Ehredt!" "Condemn me for that crime if you must," he challenged as he stepped down the tiers to the aisle. "But I have given myself a worse punishment already." No other Rain challenged his right to speak. "The same laws that demand the legender's life," he continued, "also say that any man of high title may share the punishment of the lowen, fisher, or foreigner, and therefore reduce the punishment of the accused."
"How will you accomplish this?"
asked one of the Rains.
"How will you divide death in two?"
Many of the Rains echoed this concern, for they were greatly taken aback by what they had heard. In all of Havemir's history, only a few men and women of title had been willing to share a punishment with those in low position. Since the use of the law was so rare, the Rains in that assembly were not quite certain about how to proceed, so they scratched their heads and rubbed their chins. "The legender will journey to one place," explained Ehredt, "and I will journey to another, but both of us will go into the very lairs of death." Upon hearing this, Maris collapsed into her throne. She looked even more ill than before, for sweat began to form on her brow. "As soon as I am mended," Ehredt explained, "I will sail north to the edge of the world. If our tales are true, then I will find the dead country there and plead for Halorith's soul to return to the land of the living. Such a voyage will satisfy justice, for the dead country may not permit me to leave its borders. And there is always the sea between here and there. She may show her teeth and swallow me up, but I do not fear her. If I die on this voyage, I will die as our great father Mir died. For did he not also set out for the edge of the world?"
"You'll sail to your doom," Korakal agreed. "But what of the legender? Is he to sail to the dead country as well?"
"No. He will go to the Wrathwilds. Yet do not bother to ask for my reasons, for they are my own." More murmuring rose up among those seated on the tiers. Yet none of the Rains silenced them, for they too began talking among themselves, each astounded by what Ehredt had said.
"That is foolishness," Korakol cried out. "Why would you send him into that wasteland to die? He'll be of no use to us then."
Perhaps if only the Queen and Council had been present in the throne room, the atmosphere would have remained orderly. But the large number of spectators had grown restless after listening to so many speeches, and Ehredt's surprising words had given them much to talk about. As the din of voices began to rise, many of the spectators felt free to speak out their opinions for the council to hear. Even the most respectful of those on the tiered seating felt free to talk to his neighbour in full volume. One Rain stood up to speak, but it was difficult to hear him over the noise. When he turned to the crowd in an attempt to bring order, another Rain took it as an opportunity to voice what he thought. Before long, most of the Rains were on their feet, all at once, interrupting one another with vociferous arguments. There were those who agreed with Korakal, believing that sending the legender to the Wrathwilds would be an utter waste. His abilities would have been put to better use if he stayed in Havamir. Others had taken up what Azirs and the Mainir had stated, agreeing that a penalty of death was the only solution to their nation's curse. On her seat at the dais, the Mainir continued muttering to herself,
"This man thinks he can set his will over the will of the Ulivans."
She snorted in disgust. It
Let him join his fate with the punished. Let him go to his death.
Maris had been sitting, crumpled in her throne, appearing more and more ill by the moment. She looked out over the throne room and saw that the assembly had become untamable. Overwhelmed by the disorder of it all, she desired to shrink away from the cacophony until it passed. Then she saw Heron. He was approaching the foot of the throne, but did not look up at her. Instead, his eyes looked to the pedestal that held the bowl of speaking totems. She wanted to go to him, but felt too ill and out of sorts, as though her entrails would become unravelled inside her if she were to rise. Her guilt sat heavily in the pit of her stomach. With what little remained of her determination, she made herself sit up slightly and called down to Heron through the noise.
"Do not take this punishment,"
she weakly cried out.
"Do not take it."
Her voice was lost in the multitude of other voices, and Heron gave no sign that he had heard her, but merely came beside the short pedestal. Then, with a great swing of his arm, he knocked the bowl of speaking totems from its place. The crash was barely heard within the din, but the significance of what Heron had done resounded throughout the room. All the voices died down, and silence quickly took place, as everyone saw the spheres rolling across the floor. The Rains turned to Heron, their faces aghast. "Do we live in days when a man giving his life does not silence a debate?" Heron rebuked, his severe gaze passing over the council. "This is my sentence now, and I have decreed how the axe comes down." With that, he said nothing more and marched down the aisle and through the exit. The doors closed with a mighty bang heard by all, for all had been silenced by his words.